The night he almost broke for good began with a single plate, a single chair, and a silence so loud it felt like it could shatter glass. Ethan Cole had chosen the corner table on purpose, the one by the window where the rain traced crooked lines down the glass like tears that didn't belong to anyone. The restaurant was warm, glowing with soft amber lights and the low hum of quiet conversations, but none of it reached him. Across from him sat an empty chair that had once belonged to a future he thought he would have forever. In the space between his plate and that untouched setting lay the weight of 3 years of doing everything alone. He had told himself he was used to it by now. He had lied. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest acts of compassion can change a life. Ethan hadn't meant to come out that night. He almost didn't. He had stood in his tiny kitchen, staring at the calendar pinned to the fridge, the date circled in fading blue ink. It was the anniversary of the day he had buried his wife, Lily. 3 years since the hospital room, since the beeping machines and whispered apologies, and the impossible moment when he had to walk out without her. 3 years since he had become both mother and father to a 3-year-old boy who kept asking when mommy was coming home. Now Caleb was 6, old enough to understand death, young enough to still search the sky for signs. Ethan had promised him they would do something special for Mommy's Day every year. The first year they had gone to the park and planted flowers. The second, they had baked her favorite chocolate cake and left a slice by her picture. This year, Caleb was at Ethan's sister's house for a sleepover, and Ethan had found himself unable to sit alone with his grief. So he had come to the restaurant Lily used to love, the one with the string lights and the red brick walls, the place where they had celebrated anniversaries and promotions and the simple fact that they had once been young and certain. He told himself he was just there to eat, to remember quietly, to survive another year. But as he sat there staring at the empty chair across from him, the truth rose up like a tide. He was tired. Tired of packing lunches, tying shoes, brushing tears away in the dark when Caleb had nightmares about losing him too. Tired of pretending he didn't feel like half of a person most days. Tired of being strong because there was no other option. The waiter set down his plate, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan nodded, thanked him, and picked up his fork. He took one bite and realized he couldn't taste anything. That was when he noticed them. At first, it was just movement in the corner of his eye. A woman standing near the entrance, her coat damp from the rain, her hair clinging to her cheeks. Beside her stood a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, small for his age, clutching the sleeve of her sweater. His sneakers were soaked through. They weren't dressed for a night out. They looked like they had been caught in something unexpected. The hostess leaned forward, speaking softly. The woman nodded, her shoulders stiff with a kind of pride that trembled at the edges. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he saw the way the woman glanced around the room, scanning tables as if measuring how much space they took up in the world. The restaurant was nearly full. After a moment, the hostess shook her head apologetically. The woman swallowed and turned as if to leave. Ethan didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the way the boy's eyes lingered on the plates of food passing by. Maybe it was the way the woman's hand tightened protectively around her son's shoulder, as if shielding him from more than just the rain. Or maybe it was because he recognized that look in her eyes. The look of someone doing everything they can and still feeling like they are one step away from failing. He raised his hand and called the hostess over. His voice felt unfamiliar in his own ears as he told her he had an extra chair and plenty of room. The woman hesitated when she approached his table. Up close, he could see the exhaustion lining her face, the faint bruise like shadows beneath her eyes. She looked as if she hadn't slept properly in weeks. The boy peeked out from behind her arm, his gaze fixed on the breadbasket in the center of the table. She explained, her voice low and careful, that her son was hungry. They had been waiting for a bus that never came, and she had spent their last cash on a canceled ride share that didn't show up. She said they didn't need much, just somewhere to sit for a while until the rain eased. She promised they wouldn't be any trouble. Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. He gestured to the empty chair and told her they were welcome to stay as long as they needed. He signaled the waiter and ordered another plate without even looking at the menu. The boy's name was Noah. He had a quiet smile that seemed surprised to exist. As he tore into the warm bread with careful hands, Ethan felt the atmosphere at the table shift. The silence that had once pressed down on him now made room for the small sounds of life. The clink of utensils, the soft exhale of relief, the hesitant gratitude in the woman's eyes. Her name was Marisol. She told him she had recently left a difficult situation, the kind that required courage people rarely see and often judge. She and Noah were staying at a shelter across town, trying to get back on their feet. She had found a part-time job at a laundromat and was saving for a deposit on a small apartment. That night, they had been visiting a community center for a tutoring program when the storm rolled in and everything went wrong. Ethan listened, really listened, and for the first time that evening, his own grief stepped aside to make room for someone else's struggle. As Noah ate, color returned to his cheeks. He began to talk about school, about a drawing he had made of a rocket ship, about how he wanted to be an astronaut because astronauts weren't afraid of the dark. Ethan felt a sharp, unexpected ache at that. Caleb had once said the same thing. Marisol apologized more than once, her words wrapped in humility. Ethan brushed it off. He told her that 3 years ago, he had been the one who didn't know how he would get through a single day. He shared pieces of his story, not all of it, but enough. He spoke of hospital corridors and the first night alone with a toddler who wouldn't stop crying. He spoke of learning to braid hair from online videos before realizing his son didn't have hair long enough for braids. He spoke of burnt dinners and parent-teacher meetings and the constant fear of not being enough. As he talked, something loosened inside him. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt like it owned him. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows, but inside the small circle of their table, warmth grew. Noah finished his meal and leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy with contentment. Marisol looked at him with a softness that spoke of battles fought quietly and fiercely. When the bill came, Ethan paid it without hesitation. Marisol's eyes filled with tears she tried hard to hide. He told her it wasn't charity, it was simply one human being helping another. He scribbled his phone number on a napkin before he could overthink it and told her that if she ever needed help with job applications or finding resources, he would try to point her in the right direction. He worked in logistics for a mid-sized company and knew people who knew people. She thanked him in a way that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. They left together, stepping out into the rain that had softened to a mist. Ethan watched as Marisol pulled her coat tighter around Noah and guided him down the sidewalk. For a moment, he felt the old loneliness creep back in. Then Noah turned and waved, a wide, unguarded wave that lingered in the air long after they disappeared. That night, Ethan returned home to a quiet house that didn't feel quite as hollow. Days passed. He didn't expect to hear from her. Life had taught him that moments like that were often self-contained, meaningful but fleeting. Yet a week later, as he was helping Caleb with homework at the kitchen table, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was Marisol. She had taken his advice and applied for a clerical position at a warehouse owned by a company he often partnered with. She had mentioned his name in the application, and they had called her for an interview. She sounded breathless, as if hope itself were something fragile she was afraid to hold too tightly. Ethan felt a surge of pride that startled him. He offered to review her resume, to run through potential interview questions over the phone. That evening, after Caleb went to bed, he sat at the same kitchen table where he had once cried into his hands, and he coached Marisol through answers about teamwork and resilience and problem-solving. He told her to speak about the strength it took to start over. A week later, she called again. She had gotten the job. The shelter approved her for transitional housing soon after. It wasn't much, a small apartment with peeling paint and a temperamental heater. But it was theirs. Noah would have his own bed. Marisol would have a door she could lock and a kitchen where she could cook without asking permission. Ethan found himself smiling more often. Caleb noticed. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan told his son about the boy he had met at the restaurant. Caleb listened with wide eyes and asked if they could invite Noah to the park. Ethan hesitated, unsure if he was crossing a line, but he sent Marisol a message anyway. She agreed. The first meeting felt awkward in the way all new beginnings do. Caleb clung to Ethan's side at first, protective of his territory. Noah stood close to his mother, unsure if he was allowed to run free. But children have a way of dissolving walls adults don't even realize they've built. Within minutes, the boys were chasing each other across the grass, their laughter rising like birds startled into flight. Ethan and Marisol sat on a worn wooden bench, watching. They talked about practical things at first: school schedules, grocery prices, the absurd cost of winter coats. Then, gradually, the conversation deepened. Marisol spoke about the night she decided to leave, about packing a single bag while Noah slept, about the fear that felt like a living thing in her throat. Ethan shared the quiet terror of signing hospital papers alone, of promising Lily he would take care of Caleb no matter what. They did not compare pain. They simply acknowledged it. Over the next months, their lives began to intertwine in small, steady ways. Ethan helped Marisol fix a leaky faucet. She sent him home with containers of homemade soup when he worked late. The boys became inseparable, bonded by shared jokes and scraped knees and a mutual understanding of growing up too fast. Yet it wasn't easy. Ethan wrestled with guilt every time he felt his heart soften toward Marisol. He would stand in his bedroom at night, staring at Lily's photograph, and wonder if moving forward meant leaving her behind. He feared that loving again would somehow diminish what he had lost. Marisol carried her own shadows. Trust did not come easily after years of disappointment and fear. She flinched at raised voices, even when they were just excited shouts from the boys. She worried that accepting help made her weak, that leaning on someone might lead to another fall. There were misunderstandings, days when texts went unanswered and insecurities flared, moments when Ethan retreated into himself, overwhelmed by memories, and Marisol misread his silence as disinterest. But each time, they found their way back to conversation, to honesty. The turning point came on a cold December evening. Caleb had a school recital. He stood on stage in a too-big sweater, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Ethan. He smiled, then looked to the side and saw Marisol and Noah sitting beside his father. His smile widened after the performance. As parents milled around with cameras and bouquets, Caleb tugged on Ethan's sleeve. He asked if they could all go for hot chocolate. As they walked down the sidewalk under twinkling holiday lights, Caleb reached for Noah's hand without hesitation. Ethan watched them and felt something shift irrevocably inside him. The empty chair that had haunted him for so long no longer symbolized absence. It symbolized possibility. Later that night, after the boys were asleep at Ethan's house, curled up in sleeping bags after insisting on a movie marathon, Ethan and Marisol sat at the kitchen table. He told her he was afraid of failing again, afraid of building something only to watch it crumble. She admitted she was afraid, too, of depending on someone, of letting her guard down. But fear, they realized, was not the enemy. Staying frozen was. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. It was not a grand gesture. It was quiet, deliberate, and full of meaning. In that moment, he understood that love did not erase grief. It did not replace the past. It simply expanded the heart to hold more than one story. Years later, Ethan would look back on that rainy night at the restaurant as the beginning of everything. The night he thought he would eat alone became the night he unknowingly began building a new family. Before we reach the end of this story, take a moment to comment below and share where you are watching from and whether you believe one small act of kindness can truly change a life. Because it can. If that night had unfolded differently, if Ethan had kept his eyes on his plate, if he had ignored the quiet desperation in Marisol's stance, two lives might have continued in parallel loneliness. Instead, one open chair became a bridge. Caleb grew up knowing that love was not limited by loss. Noah grew up seeing that strength could be gentle. Marisol discovered that accepting help was not weakness but courage. And Ethan learned that his heart, though scarred, was still capable of extraordinary warmth. The anniversary of Lily's passing never stopped being hard, but it changed. Now, on that day, they visited the park together. They brought flowers and stories. Marisol never tried to take Lily's place. She honored it. She understood that loving Ethan meant respecting the history that shaped him. On the 5th anniversary, Caleb squeezed Ethan's hand and told him he thought Mommy would be happy they weren't alone anymore. Ethan believed him. Life did not become perfect. Bills still piled up. The boys argued over video games. There were moments of doubt and fatigue. But there was also shared laughter echoing through hallways that once felt silent. There were dinners where every chair was filled. There were rainy nights that no longer felt cold. The man who once stared at an empty seat and felt only absence now looked around his table and saw abundance. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even in your darkest moment you might be someone else's miracle, please like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps keep stories of hope alive and spreading, because somewhere tonight someone is sitting alone, believing their story has ended. They have no idea that an open chair, a simple invitation, or a small act of courage might be the very thing that begins it again.